You mentioned that you put on some size in your back and you made some improvements there. What did you do differently as far as training is concerned in the off season?
Yeah, I ran some specialization cycles. So I don't think my calves improved. It just didn't matter in terms of my physique. Like maybe it did. Maybe it was closer than I thought, and I would have been, third and fourth if I hadn't put on a little calf size. Who knows? But every time I trained, I started with 4 sets of back, delts, and calves every session, no matter what else I had on the docket. And I did that for I think the last 3 to 5 months of my off season. I ran that. I also did a stretching protocol for 3 months on my calves using an actual orthotic device. We've got a case study we're working on that we're going to publish on that. In addition, for the last couple of years, I would say I've been focused, I'd say a year and a half. I've been focused on, for my delts and my back specifically, trying to overload the lengthened position more, training at longer muscle lengths, so lengthened partials, trying to increase the range of motion, things like that. I've taken cues and hints from both the literature that's been coming out, as well as some of the individuals out there who are trying to figure out how to work this in practice. Alberto Nunez, and kind of inheriting some of the things he's learned from N1 with Cassim Hansen. There's been some techniques that I've tried and used and found a benefit from, specifically for my back training. But like doing things like cable lateral raises with pulling across my body or behind my glute, really making sure that I'm getting a stretch in a position that I've really never gotten for my delts. I think that's probably why they improved. The vast majority of my delt training was dumbbell lateral raises, overhead pressing, and barbell upright rows as far as the medial delt's concerned. So I think doing more volume, more frequency, and then also probably more effective exercises. And there was a pretty noticeable difference in my medial delts. I just kind of have that capped look that I've really never had in my entire bodybuilding career. Like it improved my front relaxed a ton, and it also improved my front lat spread a lot. So those are two poses that I used to really suffer on because I have a relatively narrow frame. Now, just seeing that I could do that is pretty cool, because now I'm looking at, all right, my front little bicep needs a little bit of work. Like, what could we do there? Like, all right, well, I need to get a little more lats in the front, and maybe I need to do additional arm work and even upper chest work. Like, I look at my physique and I can see where these small differences could really improve poses in a disproportionate way. I think when I was a younger man, like I was 28, I'm like, well, I need to get my stage weight up to 90 kilos from 80 kilos.
Right.
Now I'm more like, all right, you give me 100 grams in these two muscle groups, that'll make a difference, So
the mindset of someone just getting into this, you think it's all about the weight on the scale. As you dive into more of the intricacies like you are with regards to things like you mentioned, length and partials, or trying to match resistance profiles with strength profiles, all that good stuff, I think there's a place for it. But let's say someone's just starting out on this. Do you think that they need to worry about what you're mentioning? Like they're just starting out into lifting, and is this something you would program for like an athlete that is just starting up with you? Maybe their training age is 1 to 3 years, for example.
No, I don't think specialization cycles are something they need to do at that point. For one, you want to do an appropriate amount of volume of what you need to see progress, and I think everyone needs to understand that there's huge individual differences for all this stuff. Like, it's been pretty clear for me over multiple trials and errors that when I need to bring a certain body part up, if it's above the waist or below the knee, the thing that has consistently worked is doing a lot more of work. The specialization cycle, every time I came in, I was doing 4 sets of delts, 4 sets of back, and 4 sets of calves on top of all of the normal amount of work I do for my delts, calves, and back.
How much training were you doing when you say you were adding that amount on top of the amount that you were doing? Like, were you in the gym 5 days a week, 6 days a week? What did that look like?
5 days a week. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is an additional 20 sets for each one of those muscle groups. Right. And the interesting thing is I learned this through trial and error back in the day. I went and trained for most of an off season with Jeff Alberts using a relatively low volume approach, like 6 to 8 sets per muscle groups at most. And my lower body continued to improve. I remember getting up into the high 300-pound mark for RDLs, and my overhead press, my bench, and my rows, they went down and I looked smaller. I actually was regressing doing that amount of volume with Jeff while he was making awesome progress. And then after noticing in 2011, that contest season, that I had actually lost some upper body size, I started going to 3 days per week, 5 sets per exercise from upper body and doing an upper lower split. And I blew up, and I finally had some of the upper body size that I thought I'd wanted or should have had. And like, you run at that all the time as a coach. There's people who respond to much higher volumes, people who respond to much lower. So that's kind of like the bigger picture variable, volume, frequency, specialization cycle side of it. I think from the exercise selection standpoint, though, there is this current feeling like, like a lengthened partial is like a intensity technique or an advanced technique or something like that. I really don't think it is. That's just exercise execution. And you don't necessarily need to do partials. I do think partials requires a little bit more body awareness because you're ending a range of motion at a slightly more subjective point. I'd rather teach someone how to do a row all the way through or lat pull down all the way through. However, I think the proximity to failure, I would probably push a lot closer to failure on almost all back movement now. Cable rows, lat pull downs go to failure because honestly, the limiting factor is going to be all right here. So if you go to a true failure point on lat pull downs and cable rows and you're measuring it by did I get the chin underneath or over the bar? Did I get my palm to touch my torso? You could probably still bang out a couple more reps, at least 3 sometimes, if you were to only do like half of that range of motion or something like that. So you see a lot of beginners with relatively weak backs, and I think it has to do with just the strength curves not being very favorable. Yeah, I think an easy fix for that is on delt work, make sure they're doing cable lateral raises instead of dumbbells, and on back work, make sure you're actually taking it to the house and being closer to failure than you would on your pressing. That would be like the baseline. Like, all right, okay, that's your first 3 years as a bodybuilder. And then as you get really refined technique and we can assess, okay, is that working or not? Like, okay, if we need to improve the efficiency of your back work, we could potentially try different angles or different exercise selection or length and partials. I will push back a little bit against people going like, oh, this length and partial thing, it's a fad, it's a new thing. It's like, well, we actually got a fair amount of research now, and it conceptually makes a lot of sense. And ultimately, we know that being in a more lengthened position for a muscle is a more stimulative point. So if that is the limiting factor of a lift, it kind of fixes itself. Like, I don't think we need to do much with pressing, squats, leg press. You know, you're going to fail when your quads are elongated, your front delt, chest, all that stuff's elongated. But for delts and backs specifically, and some other muscle groups, maybe calves, since there's a lot of data on the calves, I think it probably does make sense to think about ways to perform those exercises so that you're really making sure you're tapping into an appropriate level of intensity at a long muscle length. And that is probably the rationale is why there's more mounting data. It's more studies are done that length and partials sometimes outperform full range of motion training. And it has to do more with the opportunity cost. So you can do multiple sets and, like you said, tap out the shortened position. But if you're really aiming to make more stimulus in the longer position, just do the longer position so that most of your efforts are spent there. And that's what a lot of the data is suggesting, like Cassiano, the one in the calves. I mean, it's not all necessarily like every single muscle group we've studied yet, and there's more research to be done, but the data is certainly leaning that way. And it makes sense from a practical perspective too, when you try it. Like if you just see like, all right, I'm just going to start with doing a heavier load, just pulling until like, and there are some good visual landmarks you can do. Like I just do a pull down until my elbows are in line with like my clavicles. And that feels kind of natural. And the bar is like around like eyebrow level. I do cable rows until my arms in line with my torso instead of when my palm touches my abs, right? And that also tends to be the point when you can start to feel the resistance curve getting really hard disproportionately. And then you just ease back out, get a full stretch. And I will say that in the time course that I've seen my back thickness and my delts improve relative to all the various things I've done in my whole training career, it has been disproportionate in the last couple of years, the kind of gains I made. This is not a scientific study though. If you're someone who has a volume bias, you might think, oh, well, it's because he was doing an additional 20 sets. If you're someone who has a cool, neat technique matching exercise curves, you'd be like, oh, it's because he did all these length and partials and long range of motion training. And if you're someone who has like a failure bias, it's like, oh, it's because he was taking it to the house on those and like the other exercise he's doing the same. I don't think it's one of them. And I think we need to get away from our tendency towards reductionism. So I can't say for sure which one of those factors was the most important, but I also don't have time to necessarily run pure experiments on my body. I did take a bit of a shotgun approach and it did work, but I've also found repeatedly that I have to do more. It has to be harder and I have to be progressive if I want my upper body to grow. It's not a matter of, oh, I just needed to find this one pathway. Like for my lower body training, certainly I have to be more savvy than I do just a workhorse, because I don't need that much. And if I do a whole bunch, I can accumulate injuries and a lot of fatigue. So finding good exercises, moderating my proximity to failure, and all that is what is needed to make my lower body grow. For my upper body, it's just been like, don't get elbow tendonitis and do effective exercises a lot, frequently, and to failure or close to it. And just don't allow overlap. The most out of a week you can get, not the most out of one session. And it's worked so well that I'm actually now looking at some of my physique pictures and I'm going, you know what? I actually think I could do with bigger quads. And it's taken me 19 years of training to where I wasn't lower body dominant. My quads can actually help me have more of an X frame. Like my glutes and my hams are about the right size, but I think I might actually need to spend some time making my quads bigger. And that's going to be a breath of fresh air. Only have to do like 3 more sets, man. They don't take much,
Right.
and just be smart about it.
Let's talk about how you arrange your training. The listeners are probably curious as well, as am I. Was that an upper lower still, or were you doing full body? I know you were doing the full body for a while as well. For the most part, you would consider it a full body, but you're not necessarily hitting things directly every single training. Just to be clear, that's from what I remember from our last conversation. So maybe you can touch on that and let the listeners know where you're at with that.